You are listening to Chthonia, the podcast of the Dark Feminine. Chthonia's logo was designed by J.R. Malpair. Background music is Phantasm by Kevin MacLeod. Hello and welcome to Chthonia, the podcast about the Dark Feminine. My name is Breach Burke, and this week we are going to talk about Vaishnavi. Vaishnavi is, again, she's another one of the matrikas. We've got, I think we're about through 6 of them now. I think there's 2 more that we're going to be doing. And Vaishnavi, just as we have talked about the shaktis of Brahma, which is Brahmi or Brahmani, we talked about the shakti of Shiva, who is, okay, why is my brain suddenly giving out here? I'm like, I just did this one. Maheshwari, gosh, I'll tell you. And I had 3 cups of coffee today. I have no excuse for that. Okay, Maheshwari, who is the shakti of Shiva, and now we're looking at Vaishnavi, who is the shakti of Vishnu. Okay, now Vaishnavi is, because of her connection to Vishnu, okay, when we think about the matrikas are goddesses that are sort of by definition polluted. You know, they accept flesh and blood sacrifices. Their rites and rituals are not the kind of pure Orthodox Brahmanical rituals that we see. So these kind of Shakti who are associated with, with these major devas, are very, it's kind of, they're, like anything, they're a mixture of auspicious and inauspicious aspects. Now, Vaishnavi has to do with pervasiveness, just as Vishnu does. Let me see. So she's very much, she sometimes is referred to in place of Lakshmi, or other goddesses like Kamala, as we know, who is the Mahavidya, who is the sort of tantric expression of Lakshmi. However, Vaishnavi is not Lakshmi, okay? She's very different. Again, she is the Shakti of Vishnu. She is not Vishnu's wife, okay? They're not, they're not the same thing, although they're often conflated. Now, in terms of worship, as we've mentioned, a lot of the matrikas are worshipped as a group, and probably Vaishnavi in her more fierce form would be worshipped as part of the matrika group. But there is a Devi called Vaishno Devi, okay? And she is considered to be an auspicious deity. I believe she's, if I'm not mistaken, I could actually be wrong about this, I need to check myself, but I'm not sure if it's her or Varahi, who is very prominent in the state of Orissa in India. Very popular goddess. And Vaishnavi, okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the legend of Vaishnavi. Vaishnavi, the goddess, though, is not the same exactly as Vaishnavi, the matrika. I mean, yes, they're connected, but, and they have the same name, but they're a little bit different in fact, because one, of course, is an auspicious boon-giving goddess, and certainly has some of the qualities of Vaishnavi, but is generally associated with more, I guess what you'll call more auspicious qualities rather than Vaishnavi. Okay, so I'm just going to read you very quickly, I'm going to talk about Vaishno Devi, but that's not, our focus is on the matrika, not on the Devi, so let's just see. According to Hindu tradition, in the Treta Yuga, when Earth was overburdened by the wicked and tyrannical rule of demons, the goddess Vaishnavi was created when Gauri, Lakshmi, and Saraswati, another version of the, Tridevi, combined their energies to rid the earth of impending doom. This is actually the story. It's in the Chandipat, the Devi Mahatmayam, and so forth. So we've already been over that. Okay, so she is one, again, they mentioned that she's one of the matrikas who comes, destroying the demons that are burdening the earth. After destroying them, in this particular version, goddess Vaishnavi was requested to reside on earth that she may forever keep all evil at bay. She chose to incarnate as a human named Vaishnavi. Okay, and it says, as a child, Vaishnavi was immersed in the devotional service of Lord Vishnu, a habit she carried well into her adulthood. When she was of a marriageable age, she left home to perform intense austerities to please and win Lord Vishnu as her husband. Years passed, and as an answer to her prayers, Lord Vishnu appeared to her in the form of Lord Rama. Now, of course, Rama being an avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu has avatars, by the way, that he appears in certain yugas. And when he appears, there's usually brings about the end of a particular cycle. The very last one's supposed to be when he appears as Kalki. Okay, that's supposed to be his most destructive form. Okay, at the end of, at the real end of the cycle when everything really starts over again. Okay, so Vishnu appears to her in the form of Rama. She learned from him that he was already married and was searching for his wife, Sita, who was abducted by the demon king of Lanka, Ravana. Seeing his devotee distraught, Rama promised her that he would return to her one day, and if she recognized him, she could marry him. Rama went on to rescue Sita and become the king of Ayodhya, okay, all while Vaishnavi waited for his return. One such day she was approached by an old man who asked the beautiful Vaishnavi to be his wife. She, however, refused his proposal, thinking him undesirable for his age and looks. She had failed to recognize the old man, who was none other than Lord Rama, who had come to keep his end of the promise. However, the harsh penance of the goddess can't go unfilled, so Lord Rama granted her boon that in his 10th incarnation of Lord Kalki, during Kali Yuga, which is the one we're in now, he would marry her and ask her to wait for him till his 10th incarnation on the Trikuta mountain. He even gave her a bow and 2 quivers of arrows and a troop of his monkey army for her protection. Rama left, and Vaishnavi continued to spend years in meditation, moving from place to place, solving the troubles who all her asked with her siddhis, or powers. This threatened the popularity of a local tantric, who sent his disciple Bhairanath to find out more about her, but Bhairanath was stupefied by her beauty and lustfully stalked her wherever she went. In order to escape his unwanted attention, Vaishnavi entered a cave and continued her meditation there for 9 months as a child rests in its mother's womb. When Bhairanath discovered her hiding spot and attempted to hunt her down again with an intention of forcing himself on her, Vaishnavi appeared as goddess Mahakali and severed off Bhairanath's head with her sword. After she cut his head off, he realized his mistake, because yes, cutting off the head removes the ego and the desire, realized his mistake and begged her forgiveness. His head had fallen far from his body, but the merciful goddess Vaishnavi promised him that he would be forever enshrined there and he would be her guardian from then on. Vaishnavi abandoned her rage and returned to the form of Vaishnavi and re-entered her cave, where she assumed the form of 3 rocks and resides there to date. Each rock is supposed to represent Saraswati, Mahalakshmi, and Mahakali. Okay. And this is, in fact, a shrine that still exists to the day. So that's, okay, so that's just the Vaishnavi story, and there's that connection to Vaishnavi. Now, Vaishnavi the matrika, the one who they refer to in the story, okay, she is the power that protects the cosmos, and she's also a power of attraction that affects even the gods. They say even Shiva's not unaffected by her. And he is somebody who, he's a deity who's known very much for control. She wears yellow like Vishnu. Okay, she's, which kind of suggests she's a female double of Vishnu rather than Lakshmi. She also carries weaponry, the same weapons that Vishnu carries. In particular, in the Devi Mahatmayam, or in the Chandi, she's actually described as having, her weapon is the discus, which she uses to sever the heads of, the forces, the enemy forces. And she rides on Garuda, okay, which is also the same vehicle as Vishnu. Garuda being, Garuda's a bird-like creature, but he's most like a golden eagle, okay? So you can think of the eagle as being the sort of the mount of Vishnu, and also this is the mount of Vaishnavi, okay? Now, in and again, she's not explicitly mentioned in the Vedic text. There is that Vaishnavi story, which is a little separate, but the idea of the matrika, she's not explicitly mentioned. She is mentioned in the Chandipat, and I will talk about that in a second. But going back to the Ferocious book, they mention her relationship to a goddess called Mohini, which is a female form of Vishnu. Okay. I'll read this. This is from page 197 of Ferocious, put out by Theon Press. There's a good reason to see a strong connection, or maybe even foreshadowing, of Vaishnavi in the female Mohini avatar of Vishnu. Okay, so this is another avatar of Vishnu, is Mohini. In the Vaishnava tradition, when Vishnu manifests as Mohini, she or he becomes the ultimate woman, capable of enchanting even powerful gods like Shiva, who are unable to resist her and are utterly spellbound by her beauty, or to her beauty. Yet Mohini is never confused with Lakshmi, not in any of the traditional texts, and at least to the best of our knowledge. So then, if Vishnu as woman is Mohini, and Vishnu as woman is also Vaishnavi, then Mohini and Vaishnavi must share many of the same attributes, even if they are not directly connected in text. This suggests that Vaishnavi should be seen not only as the manifestation of the power that protects the cosmos, but also as the power of attraction, okay, against which there is no defense for mortals and immortals alike. The reader may be aware of the tantric aspect of Lakshmi called Kamala. Yes, we've talked about her. As Vaishnavi is a tantric goddess, it would be reasonable to expect that Vaishnavi would resemble her, but that's not the case. Kamala does not look anything like Vaishnavi, and we're going to talk about her iconography in a minute. Because Kamala's Kamala's animal is the elephant. She's usually portrayed with elephants, and to a certain extent, Vaishnavi does have some connection to elephants, but she's mainly associated with Garuda, with the bird, with the king of the birds, really. Okay. So her iconography, I'm going to also read this from Ferocious, only because it's more complete than other versions that I've seen. It says, Vaishnavi has 4 arms, 2 of which bear the conch and the discus, the others making the fearlessness and boon-giving gestures. She wears a conical crown. The text states that she has a beautiful face and prominent breasts, while her complexion is dark, like a blue color, and she wears a yellow garment while her vehicle is the king of birds, Garuda, who also appears on her banner. In the tradition of the Vishnu Dharmotara, Vaishnavi has 6 hands. The right hand bears the mace, lotus, and gesture of fearlessness, and the left hands have a conch, discus, and gesture of boon-giving. In both the Purva Karanagama and the Devi Purana, Vaishnavi is described with 4 hands, which bear a conch, discus, mace, and lotus, and she wears Vishnu's signature garland of flowers. In the Devi Mahatmaya, she is seated on the king of birds, Garuda, holding a conch, discus, mace, bow, and sword, without description of what the 6th hand holds or whether it makes a mudra. Yet in the 11th chapter of the Devi Mahatmaya, Vaishnavi appears with 4 weapons, conch, discus, club, and saranga, or a parakeet. So perhaps her 2 hands form mudras, or else she only has 4 hands. In the tradition of the Rupa Mananda, describes Vaishnavi as having 4 arms, 3 of which bear the conch, discus, and a mace, while 1 is in fearlessness gesture. Finally, the description of Vaishnavi in the Silparatna is distinctive in that she is described with the conch shell, discus, banner, and a chain. Okay, so yeah, she definitely is a lot more like Vishnu himself rather than by Lakshmi. Now, what I want to talk about, again, because there is no explicit legends other than the one I just told you, associated with Vaishnavi, certainly Vaishnavi the matrika. And again, this is not necessarily uncommon. There are some matrikas that have other legends associated with them that we can, like full stories, full mythological stories that we can read. Most of the shaktis are just considered to be the power of the devas themselves, which is how which again, to me, that's one of the great truths that we see in Hinduism, is just the idea of this sort of feminine, conscious, vital energy that pervades everything, and not only animates and provides us as humans in our consciousness, but also does the same for the gods as well. Now, I want to talk about. Okay, there's a few things I want to talk about with relationship to Vaishnavi. First of all, we talk about Garuda, the eagle, a little bit. That association of this bird-like, eagle-like creature that is associated with her and with Vishnu. We talk about her in the Chandipat. Now, in the Chandipat, she is described as the energy of the consciousness that pervades all. So, and she cuts off the heads of demons with a discus. Okay, and I want to talk about not only the idea of pervasiveness, but also about the discus itself and its meaning, because it's related to something called the Sudarshana chakra, which is like a disc-like weapon that's associated with Vishnu, or at least one particular version of Vishnu. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And okay, as they always personify a vice, the vice that she personifies is greed. So we want to talk about that as well. So, okay, so we have this goddess. And the fact that she has to do with pervasiveness generally has to do with, Because if Vishnu is about preserving, then this is about preserving the cosmic order. So in other words, she's going to be a goddess that's going to be angered when the order of things is thrown into chaos. Okay? That's when her energy is going to become activated, because she has a protective and and pervasive, she's about maintaining things that are good. Now, if I want to start by talking about the idea of greed as being associated with her as a matrika, it makes sense if you think about it, because if her role is to preserve, okay, so what is greed? Greed is usually hanging on to what you have. It's like the miser who amasses wealth and won't share it with anyone. If you're familiar with tarot, with the Four of Pentacles card, you see the man sitting there, and the traditional kind of Rider-Waite version, where they're sitting there clutching the pentacle to their chest. And oftentimes, sharing is actually what allows you to increase abundance. But for people who are greedy, it's just kind of like, no, I just have to have it all for myself, and I'm not going to share it with anybody else, whether it's because of a fear of lack of abundance, or whether it's just that people get intoxicated with having all this and then they just want more, which does happen a lot. You will have people who say they're satisfied with, I'll be satisfied with just this much or just that much. But then if they actually achieve that, then it's kind of like, well, maybe that's not enough. So people always seem to want more. So we have this idea of, that sort of greed out of balance. The idea of preservation, I should say, out of balance is greed. So that is why it's associated with her. And just as, she can be the provoked energy of greed, Vaishnavi can also be, just in working with that energy, Vaishnavi can also have to do with overcoming greed and maintaining satisfaction with what you have. So she, it's, you can look at them, these sort of vices or ethical negatives, and say, okay, and they do become a problem to us, because they not only affect you, but affect your relationship to everything around you in a harmful sense. So, these goddesses, they can represent what happens when it gets out of balance, but also help you to get back in balance, okay? Sometimes there needs to be a confronting of the negative energy in order to correct something. This, I think, is kind of one of the rationale, I guess part of the rationale behind goetic practice, not in the archaic sense necessarily, or maybe in the archaic sense, but certainly in the Solomonic traditions, the idea that when you invoke a demon for something, that demon generally represents something that's either a vice or a weakness of yours. And in working with that demon, in theory, what you could potentially do is overcome that weakness. Okay, that's one possible rationale for working within goetic practice. Whatever it is that you're, because generally when you're invoking something for that purpose, it's because you're basically saying, I don't have this, or I lack this. I think I go back to sort of my mind to Lon Milo Duquette's story about when he invoked the demon Orobas to bring dignity to him, because he didn't feel like he was being a proper father and supporter. He has that story in his book Low Magic, which I highly recommend. It's a really excellent book. I believe the full title is Low Magic. It's all in your head, but your head is bigger than you think it is. Something to that effect. So I always recommend. It's actually an easy read. I think the first time I read it in an afternoon. But the stories in there are wonderful, and they wonderfully illustrate the way in which one uses these kinds of shadowy beings to, to regain that balance, or to put oneself back into your own power, put yourself back into your center. So anyway, just sort of mentioning that as a side note, but this isn't the way in which the matrikas, in which you can use those vices, if you will, to gain control of the vices, I suppose, is a way to put it. Also going to mention real quickly before I get into the other aspects, excuse me a moment. Vaishnavi rules over the graha, or the planet, Buddha, or Mercury. Now, not to confuse Buddha, B-U-D-H-A, with the with the enlightened being of Buddhism. Buddha is just the Sanskrit name for the planet Mercury. And just as we associate Mercury or Hermes in Greek and Roman mythology with communications, commerce, technology, and all these things, similarly, the Mercury, the planet, this planet is also associated with these things in the Vedic system, and therefore Vaishnavi is sort of the spirit or deity that one might appeal to when one needs to communicate something clearly or negotiate or build a business or something like that. You know, Vaishnavi, it also kind of, I don't want to say rules over, but she's certainly a deity with powers related to that. Okay, but first and foremost, she's a goddess of protection. And she will generally intervene during a crisis. There's also noted that she's related to water, you know, because of her blue skin, and also air because her mount is a bird. And also to sexuality because she's often portrayed as having a very curvaceous and beautiful figure. Okay, so, all right, so let's go back and talk about Garuda. Now, it's a, okay, I'm just going to read a little bit. Some of these I'm just taking straight from Wikipedia, if the Wikipedia entry is actually helpful. Sometimes it's not, and so I skip over that, and we'll go find some other sites on, you know, tree Vidya traditions or something else that will help me, you know, come up with a sort of comprehensive explanation. But I believe this one does come from Wikipedia. So, okay, it's a legendary bird or bird-like creature in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jainist mythology. He is variously the vehicle or mount of, which is a vahana, of a Hindu god Vishnu, a Dharma protector, an Astasena in Buddhism, and the Yaksha of the Jain Tirthankara Shantinata. So Garuda appears in a lot of the Eastern mythologies. Garuda is described as king of the birds and a kite-like figure. He is shown either in zoomorphic form, a giant bird with partially open wings, or in anthropomorphic form, a man with wings and some bird features. Garuda is generally a protector with power to swiftly go anywhere, ever watchful, and an enemy of the serpent. Okay, yes, he's continually, the mythologies of Garuda have him continually fighting with the Nagas, which are the serpents. Okay, he's also known as Tarkshaya and Yanateya. Okay. So, okay, his links to Vishnu, the Hindu god who fights injustice and destroys evil in his various avatars to preserve Dharma. Okay, so that's it, to preserve the balance and you know, the roles of people in the world. It has made him an iconic symbol of king's duty and power. And we notice, too, also that the eagle, just as my aside, you know, like, for example, that is the sacred animal, if you will, of Zeus or Jupiter. Eagles are generally associated with royalty. That seems to be, I don't want to go, again, I don't like to use the word universal, but that does seem to be the common case in a lot of cultures. In fact, in America, the idea of American supremacy and everything, you know, as questionable as that may be at this moment, you know, often is symbolized by the eagle. And I don't know, just as an aside, I have a cartoon in my office. I haven't been back to my office in months yet now, but I have where there's two eagles talking to each other, and one says to the other, he says, yeah, when I'm abroad, I just tell everybody I'm a Canada goose. It was a New Yorker cartoon. It actually cracks me up because it's like, yeah. But anyway, eagles are generally symbols of sovereignty. It makes him an iconic symbol of king's duty and power, insignia of royalty or dharma. His eagle-like form is shown either alone or with Vishnu, signifying divine approval of the power of the state. So yeah, again, that kind of fits in with the idea of, say, a god like Zeus as the is one overseeing or maintaining decay or divine justice. Okay, making sure that the universe stays in balance, not you know, not thrown into total imbalance or chaos. He is found on the faces of many early Hindu kingdom coins with this symbolism, either as a single-headed bird or a three-headed bird that watches all sides. Throughout the Mahabharata, Garuda is invoked as a symbol of impetuous, violent force, of speed, and of martial prowess. Powerful warriors advancing rapidly on doomed foes are likened to Garuda swooping down on a serpent. By the way, that is an omen that appears in the Iliad as well. that when they see, and now I'm not going to remember exactly where it is. I kind of wish I'd thought of this before I started recording, but in the Iliad there is a section where that omen actually appears, where an eagle swoops down and grabs a serpent. And I can't remember which side this was considered to be an omen for, because I'm not remembering off the top of my head whether or not that was associated more, whether that was a bad omen for the Greeks or the Trojans, I guess is what I'm trying to say, or I should say the Achaeans and the Trojans. So, but one of the sides looked at that and said, oh, that's not good. But the idea of an eagle grabbing a serpent, that's interesting because, again, the serpent tends to be associated with life. It has to do with the renewal of life. The Nagas in Hinduism are not considered to be negative, but they tend to represent the eternal cycling of things. So the fact that the eagle is their enemy, I mean, it might have to do with that aspect of the snake that can be tricksterish, I guess you could say. When we talk about somebody as being snake-like or slithery or slippery, it may have to do with that aspect, because these are the ways that people find loopholes, find ways around the usual rules. So it may be that Garuda, as a defender of the order and the Dharma, may be an enemy of that aspect of the serpent. Okay, back to this. Defeated warriors are okay, I think the grammar in this is poor. Garuda is presented in Mahabharata mythology as the one who eats snake meat, such as the story about him planning to kill and eat Samukha snake, in which Indra intervenes. Garuda, in anger, vaunts about his feats and compares himself to Indra's equal. Vishnu teaches a lesson to Garuda and cured his pride on might. See, okay, and there's this idea of, it's not, that's greed. Garuda has to deal with pride. Garudas are also a race of birds who devour snakes in the epic. Okay, so we have this bird of royalty that is the mount. And you have the idea of this bird that devours the serpent. So that's kind of an interesting thing to contemplate. I mean, I've kind of given one possible interpretation of that. There are probably others, because the snake is a very powerful, potent, and complex symbol. Generally, though, in Hindu mythology, serpents are not considered to be negative. Okay, they're considered to be boon givers and very positive. So, but again, they may, there's certain aspects of them. In fact, there is one story that I recall of Garuda where he steals the nectar of immortality, and but he's been told not to give it to the Nagas by Vishnu. So, not to make the snakes immortal, and certainly. If the snakes represent that cycle of birth and death to some degree, then, or if they represent, if we think about them as being the kundalini or as being what activates our consciousness, then obviously that is something that for mortals is finite. Okay. Finite in a way. I mean, our bodies are finite. And in those mythologies, there's continual rebirth until you get off the cycle. So, and that may actually be part of it too, because it may be like, okay, the cycles have to go through until they start over again, or until the individual consciousness rejoins the Adi Parashakti, or the Paramatman, the absolute, the group soul that is beyond birth and rebirth. So, So serpents belong to the field of time, I guess is what I'm saying. So therefore, they should not be given any kind of immortality. And I would think that a eagle that eats snakes is or tries to devour the snake is that has to do with devouring time. Okay, devouring that. There's the idea of that. I'm kind of struggling for words here. It's not the eagle is, there's this sense of sort of reasserting control, if you will, over time and over the process. and over any attempt to step outside of dharma or outside of role. Okay. So we see this as the mount of Vaishnavi as well as the mount of Vishnu. So we see this eagle as having this preserving role. Now, what's perhaps a little more significant and interesting is the battling with the discus. Okay. And as I mentioned in Chandi, she's the energy of the consciousness that pervades all, that pervasiveness, okay? So there's this idea that, she's kind of the energy of that, the persistence of consciousness in everything, okay? So that makes her almost a little bit like Bhuvaneshwari in a way, which is the pervasive consciousness in nature. Vaishnavi seems to be a shakti that has to do with that, the idea of everything having a consciousness, or being conscious in some form, being connected to that preserving of that life and preserving of life. Okay, and when she uses the discus, it's kind of like, okay, why would you use a discus? If we think about using a discus, it's like obviously a round object. And you say, well, what would you use that as a weapon? I mean, we might think, for example, of like the throwing stars that a ninja would use or something like that. But, the idea of using it as a weapon in this fashion is somewhat interesting. Now, Vishnu does have a discus that he uses as a weapon. So let me talk a little bit about this, because this, because in Chandi, in one of the few places where, Vaishnavi appears and is actually named, she is shown attacking demons with her discus. So this makes her different from a goddess, say, like Brahmani, who won't shed blood. She just pours water on her enemies. The preservation goddess, in an effort to preserve, she will get her hands dirty. She will get violent, and she will shed blood. So here's a little bit about the Sudarshana chakra, which is actually the special discus of Lord Vishnu. And it's almost okay. So the legendary discus of Lord Vishnu was given to him by Vishvakarman, who was the architect of the gods, or Lord Shiva. The most powerful weapon in Hindu mythology, according to Vaishnava traditions, infallible, flies at the command of Lord Vishnu. It could be stopped only by Lord Vishnu's wish. However, Lord Shiva also stopped it when Krishna used it on Banasura. It has tremendous occult and spiritual power that could protect or destroy anything. It was used by Krishna, Vishnu's 8th avatar, to behead his cousin Shishupala. Okay, now the Sudarshana chakra, which this is the actual discus, is a spinning disc-like weapon, literally meaning disc of auspicious vision, having 108 serrated edges, used by the Hindu god Vishnu. The Sudarshana chakra is generally portrayed on the right rear hand of the four hands of Vishnu, who also holds a shankha, or a conch shell, a gada, which is a mace, and a padma, which is a lotus. While in the Rig Veda, the chakra was Vishnu's symbol as the wheel of time. Okay, that's the other thing too. The discus is the wheel of time. By the late period, Sudarshana chakra emerged as an Sudarshana chakra emerged as an anthropomorphic form, as a fierce form of Vishnu. So this is almost like there's a particular figure of Vishnu that's very fierce, an avatar that's very fierce, that where this discus is prominently used, this discus. And the discus has a wheel on it, like the wheel of time, used for the destruction of the energy. The Sudarshana chakra was given to Lord Vishnu by the Adi Shakti. Okay, that's interesting. The Adi Shakti, which is the supreme primal consciousness, okay, hands him the wheel of time as a weapon. Very interesting, right? Now, let's see. Okay, a little bit more on the idea of this as a weapon. Vishnu, in the form of this chakra, was held as the ideal of worship for kings desirous of obtaining universal sovereignty, a concept associated with the Bhagavata cult in the Puranas, a religious condition traceable to the Gupta period, which also led to the Chakravartin concept. The concept of universal sovereignty possibly facilitated the syncretism of Krishna and Vishnu, and reciprocally reinforced their military power and heroic exploits. with the Kshatriya hero Krishna preserving order in the phenomenal world, while composite Vishnu is the creator and upholder of the universe, supporting all existence. Begley, it mentions, I'm not sure, I don't have the citation there, but notes the evolution of the anthropomorphic iconography of Sudarshana, beginning from early expansion of the Bhagavata sect thus. In contrast to the relatively simple religious function of the chakra Purusha, the iconographic role of the medieval Sudarshana Purusha of South India was exceedingly complex. The medieval Sudarshana was conceived as a terrifying deity of destruction. Okay, so this is the deity associated with this discus or wheel, for whose worship special tantric rituals were devised. The iconographic conception of Sudarshana as an esoteric agent of destruction constitutes a reassertion of the original militaristic connotation of the chakra. An early scriptural reference in obtaining the grace of Sudarshana through building a temple for him can be found in the Arbudayana Samhita, in the story of Kushadvaja, a king of the Janakas, who felt possessed by the devil, causing him various ills due to a sin from a past life in killing a righteous king. His guru advised him to build the temple, following which he performed propitiatory rites for 10 days, upon which he is cured. However, the multi-armed Sudarshana, as a horrific figure with numerous weapons, standing on a flaming wheel, comes from southern Indian iconography, with the earliest example of the South Indian Sudarshana image being a small eight-armed bronze image from the 13th century. Okay, so now when we think about the discus, okay, in addition to the idea, okay, so we have this discus with the serrated edges, supposedly 108. 108 is the Ashtotara Stotra recitation, which means 108. And that's actually very common. Most gods have an Ashtotara Stotra or Namavali, where you recite different names, 108 times. You either recite the same names 108 times or a mantra 108 times, or you do, or you recite different names, 108 different names. And this particular, so 108 is a very sacred number in Hinduism. And the fact that this seems to be connected with time, okay, so that would be the wheel, like the wheel of samsara, okay, which is the wheel of birth and death on which we are a part of. And it also would have to do with the cycle of yugas, which are the various time periods where you might almost liken it to Hesiod or Ovid's Ages of Man, where you have something that's the equivalent of, say, a golden age, where everything is wonderful and gods and humans live together and everybody does what they're supposed to do, and then gradually through the different yugas things become more and more corrupted and they fall apart. And then by the time you get to, in Hinduism, to Kali Yuga, which is the most materialistic and the most chaotic, which is the one we're in now, that's considered to be sort of the final yuga. But unlike Western eschatology, which basically talks about a quote-unquote end of the world, okay, you see the kind of stuff from like the Book of Revelation or from others where the world's finally going to end. In Hindu mythology, at the end of Kali Yuga, even though there's destruction, everything doesn't end. It starts again with a new golden age. Okay, so it's the yugas perpetually go on. And that's like the idea, again, of Vishnu dreaming a universe. Lotus opens from his navel, Brahma creates a universe, then that Brahma dies, the lotus closes, and then Vishnu, wakes up, has another dream. So there's this constant cycling of universes almost endlessly. So this is a very different concept from our very linear and very finite idea of time. There's a past, present, and future, and everything's going to come to an end and just drop off. That's not the way Hindu thinking is. That's why you have the idea of reincarnation. You're not just born once, you're born again and again and again. Depending on what you may have been lacking in one lifetime or another, you might come back in another lifetime to either deal with or rectify or rebalance, whatever it is that you might have been missing in another lifetime, until you reach a point where you get off the wheel and you no longer need to be reborn, in which case, yes, you become absorbed in the Paramatman. You don't have an individual existence anymore, but it's said that getting off the wheel is a state of pure bliss. So, so there's this, so it's a little bit different. We have a different idea. It's not like when you die in Western thinking, it's like, okay, you go to heaven or you go to hell, or even necessarily the concept of going to Hades or a similar underworld. I think in the next episode, I want to talk a little bit about the Hindu concept of the underworld and the different underworlds. But it is not the same. And the idea of going to heaven, the gods live in what they consider to be heaven or various heavens, but they are not. But that's not your final resting place at death, unless you're reborn as a deva or devi. Okay. That's not the final goal. It's actually better to be a human where you actually have a chance of meeting, say, a Satguru who will help you get off the wheel. Okay, that's your best chance of liberation, is being alive as a mortal human being, because if you're alive as a god, they're not. I guess they're not. They're immortal and they're not at the same time. They can be reborn in different forms. And and obviously they would have a lifespan far longer than humans do, but they reach a point where the gods also can disappear, and probably, at least in terms of personal religious experience, at some point they probably should, if you are getting closer to that point of liberation. So Vaishnavi with her discus, you can probably assume that this is the same discus. So the idea is that she is destroying, the demons of thoughts with basically it's with, almost literally with the idea of death. Like the discus is almost literally a representation of, the finiteness of things, because there's a wheel, at some point that, in that cycle, at some point that cycle ends. So to have your head cut off with a discus is to basically, it's basically like you're being, you're being stung into awareness by an awareness of time. Okay, so that seems to be what this, at least one of the representations there. There may be others. People who might be a little more familiar with that, certainly anybody is free to jump in and comment and say, hey, it's also this, or I also heard it's that. But that seems to be feels like that seems to be the main thing, that this is the wheel of time. And if Vaishnavi's role is to be as a preserver and a protector, and then she's going to be attacking these sort of, these demonic entities that are really kind of like thoughts out of control. What she's doing is she's, this is the idea of, it could also be the idea of fortune or destiny. If we think of, say, the Wheel of Fortune card in the tarot, there's this idea of what you have control of and what you don't have control of. What's in the universe beyond your control. A lot of times we like to think we have more control over things than what we do. So this may be a representation of that loss of control, or that, needing to relinquish that control. And just put yourself in the center of the wheel instead of, getting caught on the edges of it, getting caught on those serrated edges. So I think that's all I'm going to say about Vaishnavi. We have two more to go. We have Varahi and Narasimhi, and both of them are goddesses who have animal heads. So they're going to be a little different from the others that we've encountered thus far. But they are, and Varahi has a whole cult and following and a very big tantric tradition associated with her. So that's going to be quite a bit to discuss there. And then when we discuss Narasimhi, that will be the end of the matrika discussion. So, okay. So that's going to be it for me for this week. Again, I'll just, encourage you to sign on to my social media. If you're following me on YouTube, please subscribe. Push the bell notification so that you see when I have new podcast videos coming out. And on YouTube, of course, it's Chthonia. If you're on other social media, I'm Chthonia Podcast. So it's 2 words on Twitter and Instagram. 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram. I also have patreon.com/Chthonia. And I also encourage you to visit Chthonia.net, which is where I have a link to where you can hear all the podcasts if you've missed anything. If you haven't subscribed on iTunes or one of these, you can, and you just want to listen to it straight up on your computer, there is a link there. And, and also to some of my publications and writings, which are connected to this and other things that I offer. I also have a connection to my related services at liminalreiki.com, where I provide services that basically, my main goal is to sort of help people through transitions with using the tools that I have, but anybody really can get anybody can get involved in those services. It's not just for people like that, but I especially tend to work with people who have those kinds of issues, and I do have a testimonials page on liminalreiki.com, so you can see what people's experiences are. If you're saying, well, yeah, how good are you at this? Then you can see what other people's opinions are. Because I copy them, they're copied in directly from the feedback form with no editing. So that's it for me, and I want to say thanks again to my patrons. Thank you to all of you for listening, and I'll be back in the next episode.